Recently, Darth Microtransaction and GhazzyTV sat down for an interview with Jonathan Rogers and Mark Roberts about Path of Exile 2. Darth Microtransaction, or DM for short, has been a content creator for numerous years, and recently blew up with the launch of Diablo 4. After becoming engrossed in the ARPG genre, DM decided to try out Last Epoch and Path of Exile. While he enjoyed both, PoE truly grabbed his attention, and he has been streaming and making videos on it ever since. Ghazzy is both a YouTube creator and Twitch streamer, mostly for Path of Exile. He's been at it for many years, with a large YouTube following and a dedicated community on Twitch as well. He, more so than any other creator, focuses on minions and minion builds. Jonathan Rogers, as many of you likely know, is one of the two game directors for Path of Exile 2. He has been with GGG since the beginning. Jonathan has been busting out all the POE2 knowledge in interviews, the POE2 subreddit, and even the official PoE Discord channel. All praise to Jonathan for the communication. Mark Roberts is POE2's second game director and began as a PoE player, then a QA tester, and worked his way up to game designer in PoE1 and now the game director of PoE2. Impressive, is it not? This video condenses and draws the vital details from the duo's interview with Jonathan and Mark, pulling out everything we learned about the upcoming innovative sequel to Path of Exile 1. Now, let's hop right in. All right, here we go. DM said, if there's anything you're excited about sharing, even if no one has asked about it yet, here's an easy question for you. Is there something wild to reveal? Jonathan responded and essentially said, we're not being tricked by you. We're not announcing anything unannounced, any big feature here in this interview. So nice try trying to lead off the interview with a gotcha question, but I'm not falling for it. DM then followed up and asked, are there any new complete map-changing systems or mechanics like Blight in POE2 for launch? Jonathan responded and said, not for launch, no, but they are still embracing the entire fact that POE1 was different because it stole from so many different types of genres, even as recently as Toda with the auto-battler genre, then going back to Blight and then Sanctum with roguelites and all these other systems in the game. It helps differentiate their ARPG from every other game in the market, and they are going to continue doing that in POE2. Mark followed up and essentially said, when it comes to leagues, they designed them to have an X factor. Affliction has Fog of War. Synthesis had the puzzle board. Harvest had farming simulators. Now, leagues in POE2 will do the same thing. However, they're always careful and they know that these leagues will be polarizing. The minigames will be polarizing, but once they're core, they become much more beloved because you can opt into the systems. You're not forced to do them because they are the new shiny league mechanic. Ghazzy then asked, POE1 has been lacking ARPG-centric leagues for a few years. Kill monsters, get loot. What have you learned from this? Jonathan followed up and essentially said they very much care about this vibe. They know that their game needs to be about killing monsters and getting loot. And he thinks that all their leagues do have this inside of them. You know, Blight, it was a tower defense league, but you still killed monsters and got loot. Sanctum, it was a roguelite, but you still killed the monsters and you got the loot. Just because you're pulling in all these different genres doesn't mean you're not an ARPG, and they're embracing that fact. It's what makes them unique, as we just talked about. Not every league needs to be like Legion or Ritual or even Ultimatum, where you fight monsters in a circle or in a map and get loot. They like putting cool spins on all these different systems, and that's why they differentiate themselves from other games in the market. And they're, of course, going to keep doing that in POE2, which is awesome to hear. DM then asked, will there be infinite scaling game modes in POE2 like Delve? Jonathan said it is definitely something POE2 should have, but not all content should be infinite. They enjoy having lots of finite content that you can finish and you know when you're done with it, and then a little bit of content that is infinite. They even hinted that the Viridian Wildwood was supposed to be infinite for Affliction initially, but due to development constraints, it could not be infinite. Jonathan was actually the one who designed the Delve map, and he's a huge fan of infinite content, but he knows that it requires 1, a lot of work, and 2, it requires you to push your character to huge limits to really get that maximum value from it. So POE2 will have bits and pieces of infinitely scaling content, but most of the content is going to be finite. They also talked about the new league a little bit, Affliction, and how scaling content must have a cost associated with it, an economic cost, because without that, people are always going to choose the hardest content available to them, even if they can't handle it, and that will feel extremely bad, like a lot of people are seeing now when they're juicing their maps to maximum and getting absolutely blasted because there's no cost associated with chasing as many wisps as possible, even if you're using minimal juice. They think you need to earn difficulty, not freely set it. DM then asked, as a newer player, I find it difficult to understand where I am failing. Going into POE2, what is the stance on teaching people what they're failing at, such as dying to detonate dead? Jonathan responded instantly and said, 1. Detonate dead is bad in POE1 and it is being changed both in POE1 and POE2. It's getting a clear telegraph, which is great to hear. Jonathan then follows up and says, will there be a death screen? Is that what you're asking here? He knows that it's hard to get 100% of the way. They can get 90% of the way, but then there's all these different situations that lead to your character dying. You may have died to fire damage, but you died to that fire damage because you were shocked and you had multiple instances of corrupted blood on you and you were standing in a degen and so on and so forth. They want to be able to accurately track all that information, and there's no way to do that presently. They know that they could do a death screen if they fully committed to it, but they're choosing not to. They're choosing to focus their resources on other pieces of UI and content. Ghazzy pushed on this a little bit, and Ghazzy was a little bit antagonistic for part of the interview, in my view. He said, basic death recaps will help new players. Is the Detonate Dead improvement planned for POE1 and 2? Mark responded simply and said, yes, the Detonate Dead improvement is planned for both, but not for player Detonate Dead. That doesn't need any changes. Ghazzy then followed up once more and said, on visual clarity and telegraphing, the more you see on the screen in POE1, the worse your build is. Will this transfer to POE2? Jonathan responded and said, you need to feel ridiculous and powerful in ARPGs, and you do in POE1, and you will in POE2. However, it's a very tricky balance, especially in POE1, where you've had all this power creep for the past decade, not only in terms of character power, but in all the league mechanics that stack up on your screen. Mark goes in and talks about how you have Delirium on your map and 3 Legion monoliths and then strong boxes and beyond demons sprouting up out of the ground. Then you have all your loot scattered across the screen while you have 1,500 projectiles shooting out from Tornado Shot. It's very tricky to balance this without making a sequel and building it from the ground up, and that is what they are doing. It's very hard to address in POE1 presently, but they're planning to do that in POE2 by being incredibly intentional with every single decision they make. And they know it is a hard one to solve. This problem is difficult to solve because a lot of people have fun doing this. But if you want to try to telegraph what's going on the screen and try to tone it down, people will get upset in POE1. The fix, like I said, everyone, is a sequel, and they're totally right. That is going to be one of the selling points for POE2. It's not going to have as much clutter as in POE1. We're going to be able to see our screen better in POE2, especially at the start. DM then asked, will there be more info in-game in POE2, or will people need to rely on external sources or friends to learn? Jonathan responded and said, they are trying to reduce hidden mechanics. They describe hidden things or remove them. Right now, there are 1 or 2 hidden things. Everything else is explicit. They would like to put this stuff in game and less reliance on resources. And trust me, bros, this is vital. They're also doing usability lab testing for POE2. They're pulling people off the street and asking, does X mechanic make sense to you? They also want to make some hover improvements to the passive skill tree where you hover over something and it will show an improvement to your character. Say if you hover over something that increases your fire damage and you're using Fireball, it'll show how much damage that node increases your Fireball's damage by. This will 100% be in POE2, and this is going to be huge, everyone, for everyone involved. Showcasing how you're improving your skills with simple hovering things on the passive skill tree, especially if they are very succinct and concise, is going to be a huge win for just building your character organically in game. Ghazzy then asked, will POB have a connection to POE2? Jonathan clearly stated POB will not be in POE2. It allows you to build your perfect character easily, items and all, and that's the big problem. They would not like that in the real game. POB can do it, that's fine, but he does not want the game to. And that makes sense to me. I remember playing Diablo 2 with hacks way back in the day when I was a little kid, and I would just build my perfect character with, I don't know what the hack was called, like Hero Editor, and I'd become bored with the character very quickly. There's a reason that you want to grind and build and craft and assume all this power on your character, and you stay and do it for a long amount of time. If you're able to just do it in game and kind of showcase exactly what you need to build, that's boring. Organically building it, in my view, is way more fun. Of course, there are people who would much rather look at the POB, craft everything in POB, and then try to replicate it in Path of Exile itself, but I think there's a sizable chunk of people who are like me and won't want to do that. DM follows up on this very question and asks, do you want the wonder of getting a new item and being overjoyed instead of building the perfect one in a tool like we just talked about? Jonathan responded and said, you can definitely play that way. That's fine. Many people do, and that's perfectly okay. He enjoys the mystery and experiencing content yourself, and it's more catching than just following a guide from many people out there, especially players new to the genre. He made a system a while back, though, that they will probably put in POE2, wherein you can upload a file and it will showcase what nodes to allocate in POE2's passive skill tree. That's a win. I hope that really does make it into the game. That's cool, and it will very much help new players or people who do need a little bit of guidance on the passive skill tree navigate their way through the web that is PoE. Ghazzy then followed up and said, will the Tooltip update come to PoE1 and in PoE2 on launch? Jonathan reiterated, for the beta launch of POE2, yes, the Tooltip update we just talked about will. For PoE1, he has no answer on that. DM then asked, how do you pair the momentum and need to keep it fast as an ARPG with the want to slow down PoE2 a bit? Jonathan responds and says, momentum preservation and animation quality is needed to feel fast and smooth endgames. In PoE1, being slow feels terrible because you don't have the flow and momentum that is present in PoE2. For example, ground slam in PoE2 works better when far away from monsters, so there's a bunch of cool little tricks they use to make the game feel fast and better with a slower skill like this, like the animation, the movement during the animation, and the character view themselves. Back to clarity though for a moment, he wanted to talk about PoE1 feels worse too because there's no animation differences based on attack speed. In PoE2, they have 4 to 5 variations for each skill based on the speed of the attack or skill. This helps even more so. That is phenomenal. I cannot wait to see what all these look like, and I wonder what the different breakpoints are for each skill. It's going to be very interesting to see what the max level of each attack looks like how different it is compared to that base level. I love for them to showcase that for a few of the slower looking skills to really give people an idea of how much they can build up their character. Ghazzy essentially asks, can you make skills like Spectres less complex? And Jonathan responds saying, not all skills need to be new player friendly. Spectre is one of those skills. They are doing the Pokeball idea for Spectres, allowing you to catch a certain monster in a gem and keep it there, not needing to continue finding the corpse. And the Witch will be announced very soon, and it sounds like it's going to be the next announcement, and there's a ton of Minion stuff there. Mark also touched in a little bit on this and said they will be changing Animate Guardian. It feels way too bad now. Now, the big thing that I see from this, everybody, is that the next big reveal is going to be the Witch and Minions, which is awesome, and probably chaos damage skills too. So that's super cool. I wonder if that's going to hit in January. If it does, you know who will be covering it. DM asks a little bit more about the animation process. Has the process of making many animations per skill impacted development time for artists and such? Jonathan responds and says it definitely takes time, but the rigs for PoE2 characters are way better than before. So 4 or 5 animations takes less time than it took to make one animation for a character in PoE1. Also, their lead character animator is insane at this. They keep in mind many edge cases related to bosses and such for each character too, because the way that characters interact with each boss is unique in PoE, and how their skills interact with them is unique. So that is wild. I can't believe that the time it's taking them is that much less. This is going to allow them to pump out so many more new skills, items, animations. It's going to be crazy to see what the content cycle is like in Path of Exile 2 once it releases. How big are these leagues going to be, and what are they going to add? Whew, I am excited. DM then asks, what is their sound and music design philosophy going into PoE2? Are there any new artists that they're using? Jonathan says, no, they're the same people in PoE2 as in PoE1. And there's a ton going on, like clever boss mechanic music and phase changes. Music cues occur when bosses use special abilities. Then he gave a huge shout out to Camille. This is something that I notice and am super excited for. In every showcase they've done, the music is top notch. And right now, I think my favorite Path of Exile soundtrack is the Trailer 3 soundtrack that has a hint of the main Path of Exile theme in there. Ooh. Perfect stuff, you guys. Ghazzy then asks an awesome question. Will there be bosses like Elder, Uber Elder, and Uber Elder in PoE2, or just unique, super tough bosses? Mark takes this question, of course, and says, yes, there will be uber content. In POE2, map bosses are bosses from the campaign with extra skills and different contexts or mods. They would like bosses to be harder than the rare monsters as well. Mark also doesn't like the cost of Shaper and Uber Shaper being identical. This makes people wanting to do non-Uber content pay more. He wants to change it in POE1 at some point, and this will definitely not be in POE2. It was a lesson they learned. They also are thinking about how they can make the next generation of Uber content in POE1 and POE2. He talked about what Uber Dominus might look like, and he wants more Uber content in POE1 and a lot of it in POE2, of course. And then he reiterated, going forward, Uber and non-Uber content need to have distinct item drop pools as opposed to an overlap, and they need to require different costs. Big wins here from Mark. When he was talking about this, it sounded like he was just one of those big PoE players getting lots of challenges, farming everything, and I think he is. He is super knowledgeable about the game, just as much as Jonathan, if not more so, and it's just good to hear. And touching on that for a moment, Jonathan really seems to be honed in on POE1 more than he was at ExileCon, when he didn't even know how flasks operated in POE1. Right now, he seems to know all about Affliction and everything that's going on that's POE1 related, which is great. Ghazzy then follows up on this. Do you feel there is a lot of work and time wasted in development with bosses like the Expedition bosses, which are only used in Expedition? Mark says there's definitely room to add more content with bosses that aren't used a lot, but then Jonathan says it is good there is content only a few people can play or access. If only 1% play this, then it's not worth development. That's not something that they think at all. They love the aspirational stuff. Mark follows up a little bit and says, in leagues where no one is doing this content, but then it will affect the trade economy, like 7 Fertile Catalysts being a Divine and Ultimatum, is good and they like that. And it opens up new strategies for people to earn currency or play content that usually isn't played a lot. They like this abuse and they're keeping it in the game. Uh-oh, big question here. Ghazzy asks, stacked decks allow people to access content without ever engaging with certain types. What are your thoughts on this? Jonathan simply says, they are unhappy with stacked decks. That's all they have to say about it. Mark then follows up and says, yeah, they're good in SSF, but not really in core leagues anymore. People just chase the highest economic value div cards. Ghazzy asks another question. What does trade look like in POE2? Jonathan simply says, there are no plans to change trade in POE2 to any great measure. They are a game with trade though. Lots of modern games are afraid of true trade. They are not afraid of it. And that's good. Keep trade in the game, allow almost everything to be traded. I like the Sanctum style experiments with the sanctified relics, but other than that, keep trade in the game please and allow people to play SSF if they want to. DM asks, hotkeys. Will there be more hotkeys available? John responds and says, in POE1 you can have more active abilities if they are not supported than in POE2. In POE2 you have 9 skill slots. You can get more skills from items. Some will be reservation effects. However, when you die, you no longer need to cast them, so they don't need to be bound at all. This leaves more room for real skills on your hotkeys, and you can rebind skills that aren't visible to you. Just a note, controllers get 22 binds. This is awesome. I cannot wait to not have to recast my freaking auras over and over again. Thank you, Jonathan, and please get this into POE1. Juicy somewhat reveal here. DM asks, how will we acquire POE2 Ascendancy classes? Jonathan says, they haven't announced specifics, but there are special aspects for Ascension. There are different things or quests you must do for each set of points. It's not like the lab in POE1 where you have to do the same thing 4 different times. And it has more things going on than POE1. It's Act 2, 3, and 4, and then another one at Endgame as well, giving 4 sets of Ascendancy points. Also, traps will occasionally be in POE2. This is very interesting. They also have these much earlier than in Path of Exile 1, because it's going to be Acts 2, 3, and 4 out of 6 acts and then 1 in Endgame. Very curious that you're going to hit 3 of them before you even end the campaign. I wonder how this will affect character power. Very curious to see more about Ascendancies very soon. Ghazzy asks, POE2 is definitely a more active game than in POE1. How on earth will minion playstyles be more active than they already are? Jonathan responds and says, it won't be more active, but the activities should be better than what you're doing now. So I'm guessing he means there will be a lot less meaningless button pressing, and when you press buttons and use certain abilities, they'll do cooler things than what you're doing now, wherein it might just buff certain things or be very basic. This is going to be more in-depth and allow you to edit your minions more and more. That's my guess. We'll see what actually pans out when we learn more about the witch. DM asks, will there be a bigger reason to be in towns in POE2? Jonathan responds and says, they do not want to force people to engage socially. You can play multiplayer or in single player and be relatively equal. However, the town cycle in POE1 isn't great. In POE2, there is an NPC who will identify all items in your inventory for free in towns. However, less scrolls of wisdom will drop. There's also the flask thing, but they don't want that to be the reason you come back. Vendors are in town too though, and vendors sell actually good items in POE2 you can buy with gold. There's also gambling, but the vendor things of gambling and buying items from vendors is really an early game thing and in the campaign as opposed to the end game. However, they don't know how vendors might be used in the end game. We'll see what the players do. And this makes total sense. Gambling might be the complete end game. Who knows? With gold, it's all a mystery. DM then asked, how do you balance gold? Jonathan says they do not want to make gold the trading currency for players, so it cannot be too rare. It's primarily to feel like you get a reward without dropping tons of items really. It's psychological. That's good. I don't want to be trading gold. I like trading currency orbs. It's way cooler, way better, and it's unique to Path of Exile. Let's keep that in the game. DM then asked, how are you approaching currency trading with vendors while gold is in the mix? Jonathan says, there should remain some currency to currency recipes in POE2, and there are no gold prices for currency. Good. Okay, so you cannot trade gold for orbs. That's fantastic to hear. Thank you. Thank you. Keep the vendor recipes in the game. It's a cool little bit of knowledge and learning that veteran players can teach to new players, and new players feel really good about once they learn and master them. Gazzy then asked, will gold still drop at endgame since it's useless then? Jonathan says, it will. You can use it to gamble away at the vendors. And there's no gold find stat or anything on gear. This also got them into a broader conversation on useless stats on gear, like light radius. They're going to get rid of these or improve them entirely. Like light radius will improve minimap clearing in POE2. And then Jonathan elaborated a little bit more, and I love this little bit of insight from him. He said, useless stats do suck. There are games he could mention that had this problem. That being said, you do want a couple miss stats because it's a stat that's there to give you an oh crap moment. You only want one or two of them, not anymore. But if you get a tier 1 of a stat, you want to care about it, even if it's something like light radius. They've done a lot of work on itemization and mod pools in POE2 that they'll reveal to us in good time. One little tidbit they said was, weapons don't have resistance roll anymore. You want stats that matter to the weapon on the weapon. Oh my goodness, thank goodness. I'm happy to hear that. That's just a big improvement to crafting immediately there. And already with all the orb changes with no alts and chaos orbs changing, no more scouring, items are going to matter so much more in Path of Exile 2, and it's going to be great. DM then asked a little bit of a troll question here saying, have you thought about animations depending on how good an item is during identification? Jonathan responds and says, oh, there's something they could do here, and he appreciates the suggestion. Of course, what does this mean? This is an MTX that is incoming, everybody. We know what's going to happen. Thank you, Darth Microtransaction, for the suggestion. DM then followed up about the lore. Is POE2's lore a direct sequel to POE1? Jonathan says it's in the same world. 20 years later, some characters will return. You won't need to have played POE1 to understand POE2's plot. There are various nods, but you can hop right in. It's independent, but in the same world. And we knew this already. We see characters that we've already seen in POE1, like Alva, Einhar. We know that the hooded one is most likely Sin. We've seen Katava's skull in the trailer before, and we're probably going back to Sarn and plenty of other places that we've already been before. It's going to be great if you played POE1, but you're going to be able to hop into POE2 all the same and know this story. Gazzy asked, how's crafting in POE2 essentially? Jonathan says, no more spamming items with currency orbs like alterations, scourings, and the ilk. There's also no rarity downgrading because the scourings are gone. You now care about white items and bases on the ground because of this. POE1 specific crafting systems too are now more isolated in POE2. They might be isolated by item type. So this is me talking now. This means that perhaps using fossils will only work on weapons, for example, and using harvest crafting would only work on armor or jewels or something like that. That'll be interesting if they design the item systems like that, and I think it will simplify and streamline it a little bit more. So if you know, okay, I need to craft a GG sword right now, time to go delve, or I need to craft an amazing jewel, time to go to harvest, It'll help you essentially target craft your items. And I like that. That's kind of cool. Ghazzy then asked, is Piety gone? Finally. Mark says, she is actually 500 of the 600 bosses in POE2. Uber Piety might be coming too. Oh my goodness, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy and totally a real answer. I hope everybody thinks that this is the real answer and leaves a comment below talking about how real that 500 of the 600 bosses in POE2 are Piety. Great stuff. DM then goes deep and says, are cinematics in POE2? Jonathan says, nothing to announce yet. Okay, everyone, that's essentially a confirmation that some type of cinematic is in POE2, because if there weren't, he'd just say no. So he just doesn't want to announce it yet. All of this speak just means that cinematics are in POE2. That's really cool if true, and I hope there's not a ton, honestly, because sometimes the cinematics do get a little bit tedious. Maybe one between each act, maybe one at the beginning, one at the end. That'd be cool. And of course, you better be able to skip it with ease. Ghazzy asks, will MTXs remove the weapon swap weapons from your back? Because remember, when you swap weapons in POE2, they show up on your back. Jonathan simply responds and says, it depends on the MTX. And that makes total sense. Ghazzy asks again, can you use different weapon types when dual wielding in POE2, like an axe in one hand and a sword in another? Jonathan says, no, you cannot. They didn't see enough balance cases to encourage the big work. Maybe it'll return, for now it won't. And the work they're looking at here are animation work and balance work and skill design and all that. They decided it wasn't worth all the costs, so they're just gonna toss it out. And you know, we already kind of knew this from the last video that I put out, but there are very few builds in which this is optimal or even viable. And one case is this league with Cleave of Rage, sword in one hand, axe in the other. I love it. Ghazzy then asked a question that caused Jonathan to go into quite the tirade. Can you snapshot in POE2? Jonathan says, essentially, no. You have multiple stat sets of your character based on your weapons and such. Your characters are attached to those on the back end at all times. The skills are attached to the sets they are on. You cannot snapshot. And I cannot go into all the technicalities here because he went wild. So watch the full interview, which is linked in the description if you want to hear Jonathan rant about this. DM then asked, PvP is not the focus going into POE2, right? Jonathan says, that is correct. Their player base is not a fan of it, really, and it hasn't gone too well in PoE every time they've released it. They are focusing on PvE depth and content. They do embrace and like racing in PoE though, and it has been successful. Ghazzy then followed up on this and said, any interest in reintroducing seasonal races? Jonathan says he thinks the races were super cool, but they didn't have the return on investment from it, unfortunately. All the alternate art uniques and such cost too much for the return, which sucked. They didn't see an increase in players either when they ran a race, which was super strange in their eyes. But they thought, oh, perhaps, you know, all the people playing PoE already are going to participate in the races, and the people who aren't, they don't really care. And I guess that makes sense. That's the most hardcore players that were in the races. However, I would love some alternate art uniques to return to the game from races. That would be super cool. Ghazzy then followed up and said, maybe we could recycle past league challenges for race rewards if the alternate art is too much work. And Jonathan went in and instantly said, no, they were sold as exclusive in the league. They will stay exclusive. Thank you, Jonathan, for standing your ground and holding true to that. That is awesome, even though there are lots of rewards that I wish I could have earned. DM asks, will there be private leagues and custom leagues in POE2? Jonathan simply says, yes, that's cool. That's a feature that they make money on, and I'm sure lots of people enjoy. I see plenty of private leagues out there with custom modifiers that people play with their friends on, and that's fine. Add it to the game, keep it in, allow people as many options as possible. And Ghazzy asked, is there room to allow more availability when it comes to respeccing builds? Jonathan says, we need to make sure the information is available and succinct when it comes to what they're doing on the passive tree. Players won't read full build guides and such, and we need to find an easily digestible way to present information. People will always make mistakes, and we will have respecs and free respec points, but they won't be unlimited and huge in number. This is a stance that they are standing firm on. They will not have free respecs. They think that people need to make mistakes and learn and really become one with their game. They don't want people to just play the UI and just take builds from the internet and put them in the game. They want people to learn about the game in the game, and they want them to learn by playing their characters. They're not going to put free respecs in the game. It's never going to happen, really, seemingly. They are taking a firm stance on this. DM then asks, is POE2 crossplay? Jonathan says, we haven't revealed this yet, but he thinks it is important. We can confirm everything later on. There are contracts that must be signed and such. Okay, everybody. So this basically means they're waiting on Microsoft and Sony. It's essentially confirmed, right? Right, it's coming, that's great. They just need to make sure all the technicalities are taken care of. DM then asks, I love loot filters, will POE2 have in-game customization of loot filters? Jonathan responds and says, this probably won't make it into the game, the out-of-game websites are better than what they could do in-game. They hope that you will not need it though, beyond formatting what you want to see as valuable. That is all. That would be wonderful. Truly, we'll see if they can make it work. They do seem dead set on that. But that means all the loot explosions are going away, and we know people love their loot explosions. We'll really have to see what this looks like in the closed beta, which is coming up in about 6 months. Woo! DM then asks, how do you determine what quality of life features to implement in the game? Jonathan responds and says, whatever we know we can do better. For example, we're adding a feature in 3.24 to add all your currency in one click to a trade window. Then again with fusings and jewelers, which allow you to just click once and use an insane amount of them to 6-link or 6-socket faster. They're also trying to make an MTX with a tower defense minigame and a hideout for DM. This is what Mark said at least. Oh my goodness, that's awesome. Big quality of life, and they know that there are trade programs out there that do exactly this, and they see it in game when they play. That's what Mark said. He says he sees people in his hideouts using these obvious macros that are illegal and he could do something about it. But why? They're doing this for a reason, and he wants to address it instead of just banning them. He'll address it and then ban them if they're still doing it once something like it is in the game. Finally, the last question here from DM. Can you each name drop one person on your teams who is doing a great job on POE2? Jonathan says, Blake. He is doing a great job managing the environment team. You ask him for something and it comes out amazingly. Nobody notices the environments because he's doing it so right. And then Mark says, oh Mark, Sam, who is running the animation team. Ed, who is doing the character animations. Jason on the design team is making almost every boss. Felipe doing every player skill effect. Mark, you're taking the chicken way, naming lots of people. Oh, he keeps doing it. Dame is doing items. Joey doing character art. Special note to Tyler, though, who is new and outrageously good with BFX for being new. He makes most boss effects that we've seen, and Mark almost sees himself in the passion of all these people because he was once these guys. He was a QA dude 11 years ago, and he has worked his way up to a game director, and he wasn't almost hired by Jonathan from his interview, which is absolutely wild to think about. And there we have it, everyone. That was the interview with DM, Ghazzy, Jonathan Rogers, and Mark Roberts. It was a long one, it was a good one, and I appreciated all the effort that everyone involved put into it. Like I said, it felt a little bit antagonistic at times, but by a certain part of the interview, all that had faded and everyone really seemed to be talking about the game, enjoying the interview, and really trying to drive as much information as possible to the Path of Exile 2 and 1 communities. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, and I'm streaming on Twitch tonight, so go check that out too. Make sure to go check out the VOD if you want to watch the entire thing either on DM's Twitch channel or Ghazzy's YouTube channel. Links to both will be in the description once they are available. Anyways, that's all for this video. Tala Moana, Exiles.